Hey, folks, welcome to another episode of Cutter One. I'm your host, J, your resident troublemaker and your resident culture warrior. I hope you're all doing well. It's still Monday. I got nothing. It's still Monday, so let's get right into it. Let's just power on through. All right. This is coming to us from CBR.com. This is also from Blake Hawkins, and this is the Lord of the Rings movies excluded Tom Bombadil for a simple reason. Some fans weren't happy that Tom Bombadil didn't make it into the Lord of the Rings movies, but there was a good reason for his absence. Let's see what Blake has to say. The Lord of the Rings books released in the 1950s, and over the years, they've become super popular. Die-hard fans have read the trilogy, even though Lord of the Rings isn't actually a trilogy. All right, I'll give him that one. He's technically correct. Over and over, and many know their contents front to back. That's led to a few different movie adaptations, but Peter Jackson's version is easily the best. His practical sets, excellent casting, and Tolkien-esque tone were a few of the many reasons why the trilogy is considered one of the best of all time. Sorry about that. All right, there we go. While almost everyone, get out of here, ads. Damn it. Okay. While almost everyone loved the Lord of the Rings movies, they did leave out a number of things. Among other cuts, Tom Bombadil was a sticking point for a lot of people. The fan favorite oddball character appeared in the first half of the Fellowship of the Ring book, which Jackson decided to streamline. Here's why he decided to cut Tom Bombadil despite the character's importance to the franchise. Peter Jackson saw Tom Bombadil as unnecessary. In the books, Tom Bombadil functioned as a proto Gandalf. For the sake of the story, the hobbits needed to encounter some resistance on the road to the lawless town of Bree, but they were not equipped to handle anything. So, Tolkien created Bombadil to get them out of trouble on more than one occasion. One of the reasons was to contrast just how much the hobbits had grown by the end of the story. However, that wasn't enough to keep Bombadil relevant in Jackson's mind. Here's what the director said in the DVD's appendices to Fellowship of the Ring, as reported by Slash Film. Quote, in the plot of The Lord of the Rings, in our movie, in its most simple form, is Frodo carrying the ring. Eventually, he has to go to Mordor and destroy the ring. So, what does Old Man Willow contribute to the story of Frodo carrying the ring? What does Tom Bombadil ultimately really have to do with the ring? I know there's ring stuff in the Bombadil episode, but it's not really advancing our story. It's not really telling us things we need to know. Ultimately, Peter Jackson was right. As fun as Tom Bombadil was, the character wasn't essential to Frodo's story. In fact, the whole first half of Fellowship of the Ring was a lot of world building that a film could accomplish in a much more streamlined way. Yet, Jackson did understand that fans really liked Tom Bombadil. According to the December 2001 issue of Cine Fantastique magazine via theonering.net, which is a garbage site, by the way, Jackson explained that he had planned for a brief Tom Bombadil Easter egg, but he simply didn't have time to film it. Tom Bombadil is an important symbol in Lord of the Rings. Tolkien had a clear purpose for Tom Bombadil in Fellowship of the Ring. He got the hobbits through their first major trials. However, Tolkien didn't define what Bombadil was. Most fans believe that he was an Ainur, a Vala, or a Maya, while others believe that he was the embodied spirit of the world or an idealized version of Eru Iluvatar's creation music. Some fans have even proposed an outlandish theory that proposes Tom Bombadil was really the Witch King of Angmar in disguise, which is stupidity at its finest. Fans have debated Bombadil's identity for years, and it doesn't seem like there will ever be a definitive answer. However, fans can agree that he was an important symbol in Lord of the Rings. On multiple occasions, he was described as older than old, which means that he was probably the first being in Middle-earth. As such, he existed before the world was evil, and that's why he was important. Somehow, he remained unadulterated by the invasion of Morgoth, and because of that, he represented hope, a hope that humanity could return to the joy and purity that existed before the fall of mankind. That makes no sense, Blake. In the end, it would have been fun for Tom Bombadil to appear in the Lord of the Rings movies, but his absence only adds to his mystery and symbolisms. All right, just that one line, Blake, that because of that, he represented hope, a hope that humanity could return to the joy and purity that existed before the fall of mankind. That makes no sense in connection to Lord of the Rings. Yeah. It just doesn't. Anyway, um, all right. So let's discuss. This goes back to what I said as somebody, and again, I hate when I say, well, as somebody with a little bit of filmmaking experience, but it's true. And that doesn't mean that I'm any better than anybody else. It just means I understand filmmaking somewhat. Right? You never know everything all the time, right? It just means that I understand the process of filmmaking, I'm familiar with the idea of the written version of a story and how you would need to remove certain aspects because they don't translate well to a visual medium very well. Okay. And I've always said, and people who have watched the channel, you guys know I've said this before. I am in total agreement with the removal of Tom Bombadil from the films. Okay, it was my least favorite part of the books. Okay, I've said that openly before. Right, the Tom Bombadil stuff in the beginning, probably my least favorite part of the entire Lord of the Rings story. Okay, and that's just a me thing. I'm not saying that that's the correct way to interpret it or not. Everybody has their own preferences, but that's just me, right? For me, it was the least appealing part of the entire story. But as a filmmaker, separate from that, as a filmmaker, as I've mentioned before, when you're a filmmaker, if you're a filmmaker that's at least taking what you're doing seriously, and I'm not talking about the current crop of Disney Marvel filmmakers, okay? I'm talking about a filmmaker who actually cares about what you're doing, right? One of the things that's always in the back of your mind is whatever the scene is, every single scene needs to drive your story forward. It needs to move the story forward, right? Otherwise, your film starts to become stagnant. Your audience starts to get bored. You start wasting time. That's what a lot of modern Hollywood blockbusters, they have a problem. And subconsciously, we're all aware of it, right? Like, we'll see all the CGI and all the explosions and stuff like that. And we're like, well, visually, it was pretty, but story-wise, it sucked, right? And that's because all those explosions and all that computer generated imagery, it's not moving the story along. The story is getting stagnant, and ultimately you walk away thinking that the visuals were nice, but the story sucked, right? And so as a filmmaker, you're constantly trying to streamline things and pare things down so that every scene, every bit of film that makes it to the screen in front of the audience, it all moves the story forward. And Peter Jackson did that. It's almost like a masterclass in the way he did that, right? Because ultimately he had 4-hour versions of each film, right, in the trilogy, if not longer, right? If you take out all the deleted stuff, all the stuff that they started to shoot but realized, it's probably longer than 4 hours per film, and he had to pare it down to in the initial theatrical release 2.5 hours, and then with the initial extended editions 3 hours, right? So he's constantly making choices as to what to put in and what to take out based on, does it move the story along? And they said it right there. That quote from 2001, he was like, what does Old Man Willow contribute ultimately to Frodo's story? Not a whole hell of a lot, right? Same thing with Tom Bombadil and Goldberry. Not a whole hell of a lot. It's more sort of like world building, exposition level stuff that you don't need because you're going to get it in other places anyway, right? So I agree that cutting Tom Bombadil from the movies was a smart move on Peter Jackson's part. And again, like I said, probably my least favorite part of the book, right? But strictly as a filmmaker, I would have cut that out of the movies myself. Like, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings adaptations don't exist, right? They never happened. And somehow New Line or whoever comes to me and says, here, we're gonna finance 3 films, make a Lord of the Rings trilogy of movies for us, while I'm adapting the story to the screenplay. One of the first things I'm cutting is the whole Tom Bombadil sequence, just like Peter Jackson did. Because from a strictly filmmaking perspective, it does nothing for the story. It doesn't move it along. It's sort of like an unnecessary stop, right? I'm trying to think of a movie that had something like that. movie that had an unnecessary, like, where it deviated from the main plot line, for essentially what amounts to no apparent reason. Um, I can't think of any off the top, man. I'm sure they're out. I'm sure as soon as I stop recording this, I'm gonna be like, I should have said this, right? But yeah, so I would have done the same thing. I would have cut Tom Bombadil out as well. And that's just my take on it. So I kind of agree with Blake on this one. There is a valid reason for why Peter Jackson cut Tom Bombadil's story. The only thing I take exception with is that Blake says that Tom Bombadil represented hope, that humanity can return to the joy and purity that existed before the fall of mankind, but there is no fall of mankind yet in Lord of the Rings, right? They're fighting for humanity, amongst others, the elves and the dwarves against Sauron. So humanity hasn't fallen just yet in Middle Earth. So I'm a little bit confused by that comment. But, overall, with the article, I agree. Tom Bombadil was a smart thing to cut. And that is just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Would you have kept the whole Tom Bombadil, Goldberry, Old Man Willow sequence in the films? If like I said, hypothetically, Peter Jackson's films don't exist. They come to you and say, we will finance a trilogy of Lord of the Rings movies if you will make them. Do you keep Tom Bombadil and Goldberry in the film? Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. What would you do? That'll be interesting. All right, folks, that's going to do it for me for this one. As always, if you like the video, like the video. If you want to share the video, by all means do so. It helps us with the YouTube algorithm. If you have not subscribed, I would hope that you would consider joining the army of beautiful badasses. We've got cake. And we have fun and we talk about things like this, whether or not you would have kept Tom Bombadil in the movie or not. And so I would hope that you would consider subscribing to the channel. We're trying to get to 1,000 by June 1st. And hopefully you will be one of that elite few that joins the army. And as we draw a line in the sand and defend the professor and his works, as well as other works of high fantasy, from being used and abused by our modern filmmaking industry that doesn't seem to care that much about story anymore and is all about just pumping out whatever they want to pump out just to make a quick buck. As always, if you are a returning subscriber, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. It means the world to me. You guys and gals are the reason why I do this. All right, folks, I'll be interested to see what you have to say down in the comment section below. Also, don't forget to join us over in Discord. I'll put the link in the description below, where we discuss all these sort of things, right? As well as check out the merch store. We've got a merch store down below. All right, folks, that's going to do it for me for this one. As always, be good, be safe, be awesome. But remember, stay more dorkish. Until next time, peace.